In the heart of the forest, a panicked Joe flees as a shadowy figure pursues him. Unfortunately, Joe stumbles and falls, allowing the creature to catch up. It turns out to be a vampire who begins drinking Joe's blood. Just then, the sun rises, causing the vampire to disintegrate into ash. However, Joe burns his hand in the process and becomes a vampire himself. He hides in the shadows, finds a pile of logs, and uses a blanket to cover himself before seeking refuge in a nearby shed. As he transforms, he vomits in distress. Meanwhile, Stan wakes up in his cozy home and enjoys breakfast with his parents. Suddenly, a glass shatters and his mother collapses, gravely ill. His father then takes his own life in front of him. Stan wakes up to find that his actual home is in disarray and his parents are deceased. He now lives with his grandfather Ellis, a former soldier who is harsh and demands to be addressed as Sir. If Stan disregards him, Ellis resorts to physical threats, lamenting about today's youth. Stan heads to school, revealing that the shed belongs to Ellis's property. On his bike, he is harassed by a gang of bullies who drive recklessly to knock him off course. Stan avoids falling but crashes into a police truck. Sheriff Dorney is sympathetic, but the deputy is enraged, reminding Stan that with his 18th birthday approaching, there will be no more juvenile detention or second chances. He'll face arrest for good. At school, Stan's best friend Dee overhears the gang disparaging Stan and responds with insults. This provokes a confrontation between Dee and the gang members Marble, Pitt, and AZ, leading to a scuffle. Roxy and Stan rush to Dee's aid, nearly starting a fight before a teacher intervenes, sending them back to their classes. After class, Dee expresses his frustration, saying he's fed up with the situation and feels that one day he might snap and kill the gang. He also vents about Roxy, who used to be part of their friend group but now hangs out with the popular crowd. Despite this, Stan can't let go of his feelings for her. Later at home, Stan hides in the attic, looking at old photos of his parents while listening to emo music and playing with a knife. After a few cuts to distract himself, he throws the knife with precision at a target. Ellis then tells him to mow the lawn. When Stan goes outside, the dog starts barking at the shed, but Stan ignores it and enters the shed in search of the lawnmower. There he finds some teeth on a table. Suddenly, Joe emerges from hiding and tries to attack Stan, causing Stan to accidentally open a window. The sunlight repels Joe, prompting Stan to rush outside to get the dog. Believing Joe to be just a troubled person, Stan yells for Joe to come out, and when he doesn't, sends the dog into the shed. The dog begins to whimper and violent sounds ensue before its head is thrown out of the shed. Horrified, Stan runs inside to grab a knife and tells Ellis about the intruder and the dead dog. Ellis goes outside to confirm the situation and confront Joe, ignoring Stan's suggestion to call the police. Ellis, devastated by the death of his dog, gives Stan his cane before entering the shed with a wooden stick for protection. After a tense silence, Ellis announces that the shed is empty except for the dog's body. Moments later, Ellis starts screaming and the violent noises resume. Ellis bursts through the door, badly injured, but Joe drags him back into the shed and locks the door to finish him off. Panicked, Stan uses the dog's chain to lock the shed door as his grandfather's blood seeps through. He runs back to the house, drinks Ellis's beer, something he's usually not allowed to do, and contemplates calling the police. Fearing that he might be blamed due to his probation, he decides against it. Instead, he starts sealing the cabin to prevent Joe from escaping and hurting others. That night, someone tries to open Stan's bedroom door. Thinking it might be Ellis, Stan leaves his room but finds nothing in the dark corridor. The power is out, and he hears a whisper calling his name. Stan goes to check his grandfather's room, only to be startled by Ellis's voice yelling his name from behind him, but no one is there. The whispers then seem to come from downstairs, so Stan follows them and finds the shed glowing, with the voice growing deeper. As he prepares to open the shed, the voice accuses him of wanting Ellis dead. The next morning, Stan wakes up in his room. At school, Roxy attempts to talk to him, but their conversation is interrupted by Marble, who asks for help with his homework. Later, Roxy admits to Stan that she's dating Marble out of necessity to avoid harassment during her final year of high school. Stan argues that these choices will impact her life beyond school, but before he can fully explain what happened with Ellis, Dee interrupts, irritating Stan enough to make him leave. Outside, Dee is harassed by the gang again, and after giving them the finger, they chase him through the woods. Back home, Stan notices the shed door shaking and grabs a bat for protection. Suddenly, Joe makes a hole in the door and grabs Stan by the neck, revealing his monstrous face. The sun starts to burn Joe's hands, allowing Stan to escape. Joe retreats back into the shed. Dee then arrives, bleeding and furious at Stan for leaving him behind. Stan tries to explain that Ellis and the dog are dead and that there's a monster in the shed, but Dee doesn't believe him. Stan agrees to show him, but first he gathers materials to block the door. As they work, Dee hears his name being whispered and approaches the door, but Joe appears again. Stan quickly covers the hole and Dee helps him nail it shut. Afterward, Dee is excited about the idea of using the monster to get revenge on the gang, but Stan insists that taking such extreme measures is wrong and forbids him from committing any murders. That night, Stan goes to bed with a knife, watching an old vampire movie to learn about their weaknesses. The movie Stan is watching shows that sunlight can destroy vampires by burning their black hearts and decapitating them. Suddenly, a woman from a provocative poster on the wall emerges and sits on Stan, attempting to engage with him. However, she transforms into a hideous vampire and bites him, only for Stan to wake up. As he searches for his shoes, he finds the vampire under the bed, but realizes it's just another nightmare. Annoyed, he rips the poster from the wall and climbs onto the shed's roof to drill holes, hoping to let in sunlight to harm Joe while still leaving enough shadows for him to hide. Sheriff Dorney arrives to question Stan about Ellis, but Stan claims Ellis is out, which Dorney finds odd since his car is still parked outside. Stan insists he doesn't know where Ellis is and attributes it to the old man's drinking habits. Dorney informs Stan that the family up the road had all their rabbits killed and the husband went searching for the culprit but never returned. When Dorney shows Stan a picture of the suspect, Stan recognizes Joe but denies ever having seen him. Suspicious, Dorney insists on dragging Stan to school. While preparing to leave, Stan notices Ellis's cane on the floor. At school, Roxy expresses concern about Stan's injuries, but their conversation is interrupted by a crude comment from Marble. Stan defends Roxy, leading to a confrontation where Marble insults him by calling Roxy sloppy seconds. Enraged, Stan attacks Marble, throwing him to the ground and beating him until a teacher intervenes. The teacher announces a meeting with Ellis. Since they couldn't reach him by phone, they sent Dorney to bring him in, fearing for the sheriff's safety. Stan rushes out of the school to stop her, not noticing Marble trying to follow him. At Ellis's house, Dorney rings the doorbell but gets no response. Hearing a noise from the shed, she investigates and is startled by something hitting the door. She then hears Ellis's voice asking for help and shoots the lock, but before she can open it. When Stan arrives, Sheriff Dorney points her gun at him. Stan tries to explain that Joe is in the shed, not Ellis, but she doesn't believe him. Dorney opens the shed door to rescue Ellis, only to be attacked by Joe. Joe bites her neck, raises her arm to fire her gun into the air, and then rips her arm off before dragging her inside the shed to feed on her. To make matters worse, Marble shows up and begins attacking Stan. After a few blows, he pulls out brass knuckles to finish him off but freezes when he hears a gunshot. It's Dee who has fired Dorney's gun to force Marble to surrender. Stan tries to calm Dee down, but Dee becomes enraged and threatens to hurt Stan if he interferes. Dee then taunts Marble, making him admit he's a coward before sending him into the shed. Stan's warnings go unheeded and Marble initially moves normally but becomes terrified when he sees Dorney's arm on the ground. Marble begins apologizing and takes the blame for everything, but Dee insists he go into the shed. Soon the sounds of Marble being mauled to death are heard. Furious, Stan tries to wrestle the gun from Dee, but a scream from Marble distracts him, allowing Dee to hit Stan with the gun, knocking him out. When Stan regains consciousness, Roxy is there to wake him up. She tells him that Stan is missing and the shed door is open. Roxy panics upon seeing the arm on the ground. Stan enters the shed to investigate and finds Marble's brass knuckles on the floor. In the shadows, he sees Marble's dead body and realizes that Dee has turned into a vampire. Dee explains that Joe is gone for now, but will return later. As Dee monologues and approaches Stan, small rays of sunlight begin to burn him. Roxy sees this and screams, distracting Dee, which allows Stan to stab him with a stick and push him into the sunlight. Stan then closes the shed and embraces Roxy, but Dee bursts out, apologizing as the sunlight burns him to death. Stan tries to cover him with a sheet, but it's too late. Stan tells Roxy everything that has happened, and they prepare for the night. They place Stan's body in the shed, seal up every window and door in the house, and start a fire in the fireplace. They also make stakes from sticks and gather as many knives as they can find. Stan feels guilty for the situation, but Roxy reassures him it's not his fault, and they share a kiss. As night falls, Joe emerges from hiding in the forest and heads toward the house. Pitt and AZ knock on the door, demanding to know where Marble is. Roxy and Stan try to tell him to leave, but AZ becomes anxious when a figure appears in the shadows and tries to warn Pitt, who continues to argue. Suddenly, an arm reaches out, dragging AZ onto the roof and feeding on him, letting his blood pour out. Realizing the danger, Pitt and Roxy have no choice but to let him in. Joe sabotages the power box, leaving Stan and Roxy in the dark. They believe they're safe because they seal all the doors, only to realize they forgot the attic. Hearing noises upstairs, they split up to investigate, each checking a different room. Stan finds no intruder but discovers Ellis's gun. Roxy nervously checks under Stan's bed but finds nothing. Meanwhile, Pitt finds an open window and rushes to close it, not noticing the broken glass on the floor. As he turns around, AZ, now a vampire, growls at him. Roxy is attacked and taken to the attic. Stan tries to help her, but is blocked by AZ and Pitt, who is also a vampire. Panicked, Stan locks himself in a room with a chair and searches for bullets. Pitt uses an axe to break down the door. When Stan loads the gun, he manages to shoot both vampires simultaneously. In the attic, Roxy is about to be attacked by Joe, but Stan intervenes. He opens fire, wounding Joe's arm with the first bullet. Joe is too fast, though, and takes the gun away from Stan. Stan then uses an axe to strike Joe's shoulder, but Joe kicks him off, removes the axe, and starts choking Stan. Roxy grabs the gun and shoots Joe, but the bullet only wounds his face, and the gun is empty. Joe turns his attention to Roxy, but Stan distracts him by throwing the knife he had earlier. Joe dodges the knife, which ends up hitting Roxy in the shoulder. Joe then tries to strangle Stan again. Roxy grabs the axe and decapitates Joe with one swift motion. With Joe defeated, Stan and Roxy dispose of all the bodies in the shed and set it on fire. They wake up the next morning inside their car, only to realize they forgot to lock the trunk, or something is moving. The movie concludes as they face the unknown threat in the trunk. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.